Wonderful. Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. Um, Thank you so much for being here this morning. Not that you have a choice at a single stream conference, but I'm very excited to get to talk about this, and I hope you're excited as well. My name is Amelia Clarkson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Media Collections Librarian at the University of Toronto's Mississauga campus, or I will refer to it as UTM throughout. So I have the privilege and joy of working with the Sid Bolton collection, which has about 14,000 video games, a complete run of titles for almost every major North American console release, 100 consoles, 5,000 periodicals, and some really excellent obscure items that ultimately did not survive the market, like the Action Max, which hooked up to your VHS player had a total of 5 games, and we currently have 4. So earlier this summer, I attended a couple of game studies conference presentations. Quick show of hands, how many of you have been at a game studies presentation? A few. Okay, so one of the things I love is that most of the speakers begin their presentations and introduce their topic by talking about a very personal connection to gaming. We're talking like personal family photos of them unwrapping a Nintendo on Christmas morning. So I wanted to do the same here. Sid Bolton was a software developer, game historian, and lifelong video game collector from Brantford, Ontario. He saw the value in creating and preserving a record of gaming technology and amassed one of the largest known personal collections. His most memorable game from childhood was the first one that he ever played, Adventure, on his dad's IBM PC. His first at home console was the Coleco Telstar. And one of the first collections that he really started intentionally curating was for the Atari 2600, when he bought the console for $20, bundled with a few games, including Pitfall, which was the only one he actually wanted to play. He started getting intentional about collecting in the 80s and continued for 30 years. And when he passed away in 2018, he wanted his collection to stay together, be accessible to the public, and most importantly, be playable. So UTM acquired all of this content in 2020. We've been unboxing, testing, and listing everything since then. We've just barely begun purchasing some games, some magazines to sort of fill in the gaps. Pretty much everything we have is still from Sid. But the collection has its official launch next month. And to my knowledge, this is one of the first times that anyone from our team has spoken about it at a library conference. So, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about the collection a bit more, and then I'll get into the exhibit that I've been building for it, hoping you don't mind hearing about video games a bit. So, the biggest question is probably, why did UTM acquire this collection? Beyond game studies as its own field, which I'll get into, we've seen video games as a medium appearing on syllabi in university courses across disciplines more and more. So we have this rise of video games as an analytical and theoretical text. For example, in the past year with our collection, we've had visits from courses in English, cinema studies, gender studies, history, just to name a few. Video games are also a sort of canary in the coal mine. So if you have courses that are dealing with digital life or technology, the interactive technology that video games use often get adapted for other types of media. But even in the recent past, they haven't always been accessible for academic study, even as we see this growing game studies field that needs content to support it. So at UTM and across the 3 campuses at the larger U of T community, we have faculty doing academic research about video games. And originally, UTM began offering select undergraduate courses in game studies, but these were actually based in our English and drama department. So they were sort of based in a humanities and social sciences approach. Our minor in game studies officially launched this fall. Courses can sort of be broadly classified as either taking a game design and world making approach, or still that cultural, artistic, narrative analysis kind of approach. And it includes video games, but also tabletop and role playing games. So it's a really neat program. The video game industry itself is currently valued at over $200 billion Canadian a year. This surpasses both the book and film industries, both of which I would say are pretty firmly situated within academic disciplines. But all the time, I find myself confronted with the question, why would a library need a video game collection? And why would we need one this big? So if the reasons I've laid out are not convincing enough for why we might pursue this collection acquisition and the development of the game studies minor, a study published in July of this year just might do the trick. So, in the first ever study on the availability of classic video games, conducted in partnership between the Video Game History Foundation and the Software Preservation Network, they found that 87% of classic video games released in North America are critically endangered. So, let me put that another way. Just 13% of video game history is available in the current marketplace. With that staggering statistic, it's not hard to imagine that anyone who's trying to do research on video games has run into a case where they can't get a copy of a game that they're trying to study because it's out of print. And in that case, for individuals, the only access options are seeking out a collection of vintage games and the associated hardware, piracy and emulation online, or traveling to the few libraries that offer digitized preservation copies, but these need to be played on site. So today I can't get into the details of how we plan to approach potential digitization and preservation, but I can say that we see the value in being a library that can even provide that collection of retro games and associated hardware so that users can have the experience of gaming on original consoles. And we also see the value in acquiring this near complete library for almost every game, almost every console, should we reach a point where we can get more intentional about digitization and preservation. So, as I mentioned, it was important to Sid when setting stipulations for the legacy of his collection that the games be playable. And so, this is our number one goal as well. We use a special collections model where we have a reading room for access by appointment only. The items in the collection don't circulate for borrowing. They can only be used on site where, we keep them away from food and drink and ink pens and all those dangerous things. You can see our reading room, which we still call it, here in this photo. We have individual stations set up with old CRTs and a few more modern TVs, and you hook up each console. And while we do take some preservation measures like acid-free boxes and bags when storing the collection, cleaning and repairing some of the older cartridges on site, the games are in no way, on display behind glass. Preservation concerns are really second to interacting with items. So that means that, say we have this sealed copy of the big box edition of Earthbound, which is a game for the Super Nintendo from the mid 90s that is currently valued around $1,000 when it's sealed. If one of you came in and wanted to play the game or even just look through what's in the big box edition, we would not hesitate to just grab an X-Acto knife, rip off that packaging, and let you take a look. So we take time to show researchers how to do things like load and operate consoles that might be new to them, but we also encourage them to do it themselves after. We see this as really important to being part of the retro gaming experience, especially for maybe students who haven't used some of these older consoles. And we have already had a couple of consoles get damaged in that process, but it's a risk that we know we're taking in facilitating that idea of research and play first. Just a little bit more about our reading room. We've had individual research visits, organized class visits. We have had some students sort of lead to more casual visits near the end of the term where they just come in for an afternoon with a couple friends, request a stack of games, and play through them without it being related to coursework. And we are actually open to the wider community as well. It's not just the university. It's still by appointment only, so word is just starting to spread that the collection exists. My favorite visit from the public so far has been a dad who wanted to show his 7 and 10-year-old sons the Atari games that he grew up playing. They were incredibly unimpressed. The games were simultaneously too boring and too hard. Amazing. So now that you know a little bit more about our collection and how it works, I want to get into the challenges of exhibiting it online for the first time. Hmm. So when I proposed this talk several months ago, classic library conference disclaimer, this exhibit was supposed to launch at the beginning of September, and I had hoped to have a finished project to walk you all through today. But the launch date for the launch date for our collection and celebration event got pushed to November, and so did the exhibit. And then, as ever, technical problems occurred, which we'll talk about. So please stay tuned for this exhibit in November. And for today, I'll just show you some previews of the current version that is under construction. And with that being said, images that are included in the exhibit right now are placeholders. Some were taken with a nice DSLR and a light box. Some are quick iPhone snaps because we just changed our photography setup. So the images are going to be retaken and updated, but this platform makes it really easy, which we'll talk about. Okay, so a bit more about our platform. For special collections at UTM, we use Adam Matthew or AM Quartex. It's a subscription-based content management system, and this model in the first place is really important. It allows us to outsource our tech support for that platform to AM because we don't have our own IT in the library. The platform supports image and video files. It's triple IF for images. It's WCAG 2.1. The user interface is quite easy for individual assets. In creating the collection, you upload an image or video first, and then the associated metadata can be customized to any standard. So we use Dublin Core most of the time. We have one collection where we use Darwin Core. You can batch upload and edit. Link data isn't supported yet. So even if we're, say, cataloging to LC standards, we're not pulling from an API, but apparently that might be coming soon. I can't say much more about how we chose Quartex collections in the first place because it was before my time at UTM, but the exhibits feature rolled out after we were already using it for a lot of our special collections. So for the exhibit side of things, there are two ways that you can populate it. You can create one of those collections first and then pull content into an exhibit. Or you can contact your support at AM and basically have them create an empty site or an empty exhibit and then upload content to a media library. There are pros and cons for each approach. If you're already building a collection in Quartex or you have a complete collection, you want to exhibit items, it's great that you can use existing metadata, existing images. But for the Bolton collection right now, with 14,000 games waiting to even get cataloged in the first place, and then several boxes that we haven't even unpacked yet, creating a Quartex collection is not a priority right now. We have a finding aid that gets updated as we complete each run of games. So instead, uploading and pulling from a media library is a little bit easier. So you can see here, all of these are just screenshots. I'm not going to go into the platform. This is our site landing page. On the left, we have a general UTM site where all of our collections live. And then we have an unpublished exhibits page where we can work on them and publish them when we want to. So when I click into our site and into the exhibits, this is the page that I land on. You can see across the top, we have the site manager, which we're now on. And then the next tab is for the media library, which is where I upload all of my images. You can see I can organize them into folders. I can rename them right within the media library. Most images need to be edited before you get them in there. The only editing that you can do within it is maybe crop an image. So it's really easy to build an exhibit site just by taking photos, adding them to the media library, and then pulling them into the exhibit. And the only fields that are required are alt text, a caption, and your description. So if we were doing a collection first, we would need to fill out the metadata fields that we've set. This is faster because we can just decide what information we want within the exhibit. So all the screenshots that I'm showing today are either from the back end where I'm working, or preview mode, which shows you what the front end will look like for your users. Um, Another thing to note about creating an exhibit with custom images versus pulling from a collection is that we're likely going to have a single item in a photo when it's a collection. But for this exhibit, maybe you want to tell a story about two pieces of your collection together. So on the left, we have Atari's officially licensed but disastrous ET game. For a long time, there was a rumor in the video game industry that the game was so bad it was buried in the desert. This is actually true. There is a landfill in New Mexico full of Atari ET games and some other Atari titles from the video game crash in 1983. So even though this was licensed, Steven Spielberg signed off on it. Terrible game. And one of the issues with Atari in the 80s was that even though you could license some games officially, there were a ton of bootlegs. So this one on the right is actually an even worse Canadian game that was developed in Southern Ontario called Extraterrestrials. As far as we know, there are 3 copies in existence. We have all 3 of them. It's very rare. It's not good, but it's rare and very valuable. So by using the media library, we can create more customized images. We can put things together, tell a story about them. Whereas in our collections, we're very much just like cataloging a single item and taking pictures of them in a very specific way. We can also have the display image for the exhibit item on the right. So this is now in the front end preview side. And we can embed additional images or videos on the left side with the text. So here you can see the item is another Atari game, Space Invaders. And we have 3 different examples of box art on the right. One of the things I like talking to students about if they've only had a modern gaming experience is that Atari's boxes and manuals did a lot of imaginative work for you. So you can see different ideas of what the Space Invader aliens and their ships might look like. And then in the text, we have a playthrough video where you can see the weird pixelated squiggles that don't look as cool as the box art at all. So good juxtaposition. And I mentioned that Quartex Collections supports image or video files, and so does exhibits. So technically, the item being displayed instead of a photo could be a video. Another reason the launch got pushed back is because we have another video game related media collection that we're working on. And so we might end up featuring some stuff from that collection that would be in video form, and we could easily do that. Just a couple other features to quickly go over with the exhibits platform. It responds to screen sizes on its own, so it'll scale for small to large screens, phones to computers. All of the exhibit sites have a uniform design. So that front end side that you saw, all of our collections will look like that. When I look at Cortex collections from other libraries, they look like that as well. It's a closed box, so we're not changing HTML. There's not a lot offered in terms of customization, and that's obviously a pro and a con, right? So one of the cons of that is that the only type of page you can create is an item page. So say that you have an exhibit like this one that's arranged chronologically, but also thematically, and you want to sort of give an introduction to each section. You can't have a page that sort of cues your visitors that this is a different part. It still just looks like an item. So we're experimenting with a couple different ideas. One thing we're thinking about doing is using advertisements from some of our periodicals from the time to sort of show you how gaming was being represented to the public. Who is it for? What's it about? This is one of my favorite ads. It's an example of Sega trying to capitalize on a very edgy image to compete directly with Nintendo, which was taking a really intentionally like family-friendly, sexless approach. So you can see it's a kid looking at 2 Sega systems that lock together, and he's like, "Mommy, what are those systems doing?" Because they're on top of each other. You can see either way. It's displayed like an item with blank space around it, text on the side. So you kind of have to do a bit of work to differentiate. For our library, we're okay with keeping it simple. We intend to create exhibits probably a couple times a term, maybe even monthly. So we don't want to spend a lot of time. We want them to look similar. We want the focus to mostly be on the items, but it could be a drawback. We do have another example of a collection at UTM that was done in collaboration with another department and a faculty member with some grant money. And our Adam Matthew rep was really open to working with our library and a designer to create a website for an exhibit called Visualizing the Americas. I encourage you to check it out. So in this case, Quartex Exhibits is just running the back end, and then there's a user-facing website with more features. This is a lot more time and labor intensive to do for every exhibit, but it's possible. Um, that being said, this is a screenshot of a feature that was developed just for that exhibit, which is a visual timeline. You can scroll up and down. And Adam Matthew actually is now developing this to roll out across the exhibits platform for everyone to use. So one of the things that we like about working with them is that we see that they're willing to continuously improve this platform, collaborate with users, but then share the developments out with everyone. But like I sort of said at the beginning, our special collections department is a small team. We don't have a ton of support for technical development, so we can get a site that's functional, looks good, and importantly, it's maintained long term. So AM updates the functionality over time. We don't need to worry about preservation or broken links, things like that. So that's a little bit about the site. Um, to close, I want to get into the complications of exhibiting video games specifically, which I know you're not all working with, but I'll hopefully try to extrapolate a little bit for maybe other unique or complicated collections. So this is the first exhibit that the library has created with Cortex on our own. And the idea behind this one was to provide both an introduction to the Bolton collection, as well as a bit of a crash course in video game history. So with the Game Studies minor launching at UTM, we're going to link this exhibit in syllabi in those courses. And that way students can get an idea of what's available to them in the collection and also get a really broad overview of the history that it represents. As I mentioned, this minor came out of elective courses that started in English and drama. So students that are taking these courses are coming from many different approaches, interests, definitely not exclusive to being a gamer. So we really want the collection to feel accessible and welcoming if it's something you maybe haven't studied before or even played in your spare time. And then we've also heard from faculty and more experienced researchers that the collection is just overwhelmingly vast and they don't know where to start. They don't know what games to even include on a syllabus because there's so many. And I can attest to that. The first like 2 months of this exhibit was just me changing my mind every day about what items are going to be in it because there are so many. Um, So this exhibit at least displays some items, explains related aspects of history, and can provide a jumping off point. And then for me, I really wanted to center Sid Bolton as the original steward of this collection. And when I started doing some research, I found this quote in an interview that he gave in 2008. And this is now the landing page for the exhibit because it really guided what I wanted to communicate and provided the central theme. And I'll read it out because the text isn't super clear. So Sid was asked if the games that he personally grew up with were going to stand the test of time and have more staying power than modern games, modern being 2008 at the time. And what Sid said was, I think it has more to do with associative memory than anything. The reality is that they were the first things we had encountered of that type. That made a bigger impact for that reason. For gaming, we had nothing else to compare it to, so the first games that came out were just darn amazing, but it's all we had. They weren't just good games, they were things that changed the way we thought about televisions and interactivity and ultimately control. We had control over the images on the TV, and that's not just something that could be taken lightly. So I think people will have fonder memories of their first gaming experiences over the ones today. On the flip side, I'm sure kids of today will remember their first games too with a fondness that will be similar. When they reach a certain age, the PS2 or Xbox will be remembered as the greatest thing ever. So there are a lot of things I really love about this quote and wanted to try to bring into the exhibit. One, original games like the Atari ones I was showing you are probably not impressive by today's standards. If students are coming from growing up and their first console is maybe the Nintendo Wii and Wii Sports, the way that you physically play tennis in Wii Sports is not impressive compared to Pong on the Atari. But as Sid says, they were amazing for their time. They revolutionized what a TV could do. So, trying to communicate that sense of history. He talks about technology and interactivity, the way that you have control in a video game. He rejects hierarchy, the idea that some games are just better. He says this is subjective. The games that you play will mean the most to you, and he's not dictating what is worth your while or what should be ignored. And I think this creates a really welcoming space for students. You can explore this collection how you want. You can decide what's worth your time. And then finally, he talks about associative memory, which I think for Sid could mean two things. Because remember, he's a computer programmer. So he could be talking about auto-associative memory in computing, which is a type of memory where you can retrieve a piece of data upon presentation of only partial piece of information. But he's also talking about a human experience. So he could be talking about associative memory in psychological terms, the process by which humans learn and remember the relationship between seemingly unrelated concepts. I like to think it's both. I wanted to capture both. So think about the way that people define a game's quality and importance in terms of their own emotional attachment to it. Those game study scholars showing pictures of themselves as kids with games. And the way that seeing the first game you played brings up the ways that it might have changed how you thought about gaming or shapes the way that you still do. A lot of what he's talking about here and what I wanted to try to capture is affective and interactive, which, in case it's not obvious, an online exhibit with static images is not the most conducive medium for capturing that. So, here are a few examples from the exhibit of how I tried to address that. So, first, that question of whether older games were really the best, particularly in comparison to modern games. This is the Magnavox Odyssey, which, for our intents and purposes, was the first home video game console. We're lucky enough to have a complete boxed console with all of the accessories. What does that mean? Well, in case you didn't know, when the Odyssey was being released in 1972, the team at Magnavox thought there's no way people will just play with their TV. So we need to add things that show them it's interactive, like dice, poker chips, paper money, playing cards. And let's not forget the plastic overlays that physically stick to your TV screen with static to augment the three blinking dots that a TV could display at the time. So, an example of a drawback with Quartex is that we can only have a single image per entry. We can't say create a collage or a carousel that you could flip through and see more. So I knew I wanted an exploded view of the Magnavox with all these physical things that come in the box. As I mentioned earlier, I could have embedded more images down the side, but it's a very crowded photo already. So, a couple of ways to work around this. Users, you can see in the middle, there's a control. They can increase the size. They can also then blow this up to full screen one more time and zoom in on parts of the image. It's a little more interactive. It might not be as obvious as if you could like flip through to get more detail. And because I wanted the focus to be on the image, instead of embedding a video, you can also link out. So I've linked out to a Let's Play of the game that I'm showing here, which is called Haunted House. That's what the screen overlay is for. And the playing cards on the side are for that game specifically. Next up, that idea of rejecting hierarchy when we think about what games should be included and who they're for. Here we have a view of the back end where we're building the page for Mattel's Intellivision, which even though it didn't have a lasting legacy, it was only on the market for 5 years. It had 16-bit graphics and a built-in GPU before any other system. It really came to inform the next 2 decades of technology. And it's pictured with the game Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack, because it was one of the first consoles to offer games that were specifically for adults instead of framing it as something that was for kids. Or one of my personal favorites, the story of how Pac-Man was actually created with teenage girls in mind, trying to expand the audience for arcade games. So Toru Iwatani, who created Pac-Man, noticed that arcades were pretty much exclusively male spaces, but cinemas were places where you would go on a date. And so he thought, how do we make an arcade game that could be a date game that appeals to women? And spoiler alert, slightly reductive logic. I find it relatable though. He was like, what do women like? Eating small cakes and fruit. So Pac-Man is shaped like a cake with a slice missing, and he's eating little bits of fruit. And he's like, this will attract the ladies to the arcade. And then a few years later, we get an even more feminized version with Ms. Pac-Man, which went on to outsell Pac-Man as one of the best-selling arcade games of all time. And so here in this image, you see we have the game manual in the foreground. There's other parts of the exhibit where we'll have some of our gaming magazines. We're not going to take a photo of every page. It's not a replacement for flipping through it. It's just to sort of give people a taste, and stress that anything you see in the exhibit, you can come in and interact with in real life. But like I said, play is really hard to communicate in an exhibit. We feature games where we talk about play, like how Zelda and Pokemon were inspired by childhood exploration. The ability to include a video of something like a playthrough, like I showed you before, can add to the understanding, but it's certainly not the same as experiencing it. So these are just a few of the challenges that were specific to exhibiting video game history with Quartex. Like I said, I'm aware not all of you have a video game collection, so I wanted to try to sort of extrapolate some best practices for any special collection that might include unique or unconventional items. So first, and like I said, coming soon for this exhibit, decide how to consistently stage your photos, consider what viewers might want to see if the exhibit ends up being the extent of their interaction. This is on our public-facing website. People from all over the world can look at it. For us, providing some close-ups, some wide scale was important to us, but also accept that an image is never going to be enough to showcase interactive media. So focus instead on creating an object that draws you in and makes you want to visit in person. Similarly, depending on the size of your collection, deciding what items to include to maybe strike a balance between classic or well-known history and sort of niche anecdotes or rare items. I think it's really important to tell a story throughout, so we try to tie items to history or news or movements that were related. And the text is obviously equally important for this. Think about the theme of the exhibit and how it can be communicated throughout. For me, like I said, this really came together when I found that quote from Sid and started thinking about the effective element, and accepting that it is the biggest difficulty with games. There are inevitable limits here, and I don't have time to get really meta with the question of, is a game if it's not being played? But then again, with a collection like this, I also think it's important to respect that there are many ways your users might want to interact with items. We've already seen in our experience that not everyone wants to play. They want to come in and look at things. They like watching other people play. This is for everyone. And so in that way, I actually sort of like Vortex even more. Its display is really basic. It lets the items be the focus, and it lets users navigate with a lot of flexibility. Because like Sid said, the experience of these items and their history is ultimately subjective. So thank you so much for listening. My email and our collection site are up here. Stay tuned. The exhibit will launch on this collection site later next month. I'd be very happy to take some questions now, but come find me later in the next 2 days if you just want to ask me if we have that one specific game from your childhood. Thanks.
So the first question that comes to my mind is about maintaining the consoles. We have a historic computing collection at UVic, and it's a lot of work to maintain, and finding people who can do that work is really challenging. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you guys organize that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are lucky to be in the GTA where there is a game store called A&C Games, and they're one of the few places that are still offering repairs. This is obviously fraught because it's outsourcing. We don't know how long it will last. One example is we had two Intellivision consoles, neither of them worked. They were able to repair one, and then they were actually able to source another working one for us. So external partnerships like that, the gaming community does so much work on self-maintenance, but it's a learning curve for our team. We're literally watching YouTube videos to try to clean and potentially repair that two-part Sega console that I was showing you. Longer term, we want to be able to do as much of this ourselves as possible. So not yet with the video game equipment, but with some other digitization equipment we have for Betamax, we are actually in the process. We got a grant to create a workshop to teach ourselves and some other library workers how to maintain that technology on their own. So I foresee us pursuing that in the future with the game consoles. And like I mentioned, it's even a bit heightened for us because we're really encouraging interacting with them. So we already had a PlayStation 2 get broken because teens don't know how to remove a CD. They don't they don't know that you have to put your finger in the middle and press down. They just grab it. And so the little piece chipped right off. And they were like, "What's wrong with this?" They are not impressed with older consoles most of the time. So yeah, it's a really loaded question, and I guess the answer is like we're working on it, but we will be trying to do as much of it in-house as we can and using A&C Games in Toronto for as long as we can.
Thanks so much for very interesting over here, back in the corner. And thanks very much for shouting out Pong. Um, the Gosh, there's so many interesting things about this. There's so many questions. One thing that I would say is something that springs to mind for me is how many commonalities there might be between this collection and its user base, and classical music and its user bases. Musicologists who are studying the stuff that it is and its cultural connections, historical connections, and the actual practitioners of those arts. And of course, there are practitioner communities for these video games.
Mhm.
Another thing that springs to mind is the rock family tree, which is a visual. I don't know how old it is at this point, but it traces connections, sort of genealogical connections of rock musicians, of bands, of their aesthetics, of their genres, and the idea that perhaps an interesting extension of what you've done, which with what seems to me a begging your pardon, a very inadequate tool,
Mhm.
right, to give your users an idea to make exhibits. But perhaps the idea of establishing a metadata model similar to the sort of stuff that you have in music cataloging. And I'm terrible with names, but I'm thinking Nancy Lorimer has a lot of linked data stuff, which is very interesting about the implementation aspects of music, right? In terms of you need the right instrument, you need the right instrumentation, you know, all these sorts of weird things. There's all sorts of equipment very similar to you need the right emulator, you need the right system, et cetera. But the idea of perhaps having a way of self-curating that given a given a particular sort of search with robust metadata, you can sort of create your own journey where the selection of these item records turns into a little bit of a narrative about, you know, a particular system, a particular way of playing, pixelated, non-pixelated, ASCII versus tiles versus full graphics, all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So anyway, thank you. It's very fascinating.
I'm going to come find you later. I would love to chat more. That sounds great.
Yeah, go ahead. I thank you very much for your presentation, and I very much liked how you described how a lot of game scholars will talk about their origin stories, and you were kind enough to share Sid's, and I think that helped the context. But I was very curious about if you had a gaming origin story, and what would if you would like to share it with us.
Thank you. So I always tell students that I was not hired to work on this collection because I was a gamer, and that can actually be a bit of a drawback because you can get a little bit precious about things, which I am not. So my background that informed working with this collection was working on copyright and preservation stuff with film, and it was like, well, that's the closest thing we have right now in the library to video games, so let's try it out. I grew up surrounded by gamers, so watching a lot of people playing video games, which is what I do now when I'm in the reading room. I watch people play games. But the first video game I played as a kid was called Jammer Lammy. It's a rhythm game for the PS2. It has really cool flat paper style animation. And I got to learn more about it when I was working on this collection because I found out that in Japan, in the final level of Jammer Lammy, Jammer Lammy is a cool guitar player, lamb punk girl. And in the last level, she goes to hell, and she has to escape hell by shredding. Um, but in America, they were like, absolutely not. But there was not enough money to actually create a whole new level. So in the last level in the game that I played as a kid, she just falls into a volcano, which is also very fiery. So they could still use the hell level, and you just shred to get out of the volcano. So shout out to Jammer Lammy. Thank you for asking that question. I like talking about that game.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. So yeah, I saw you upload your game connection on the website, and I like your idea for the creation and tell the story. So my question for you is, you mentioned that you also try to implement these connections, discovery to the students and the faculties, and also integrate to another system you mentioned in the like syllabus and maybe learning management systems. So did you start it or you already implement this kind of
Like the system defines
yeah,
the games?
like integrate another systems, something
Mhm.
like
No. So
thank you.
thanks for your question. I think I touched on this really briefly, but just to be more explicit, we are still unpacking boxes. So right now we're purely listing games. So on our collections website, we have a finding aid that's just a giant multi-tab spreadsheet with the games listed. And that's really the only connection we have for exploring the collection right now. This exhibit will be a first step. The games are not cataloged yet, so the information on them in the exhibit is the only thing that users will have access to. We will eventually catalog the game, and we'll probably do more with Quartex collections, but we're literally talking like years, I think, just because of the sheer size of the collection. So we've prioritized just the finding aid for now. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's Friday. There's a group of us who are doing a study on collaborative gameplay in Wii bowling.
Love it.
How do we play Wii bowling at your how do we do that research?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the collections website, we have our research request form. And so you look at our finding aid, you see that we have a Wii, that we have Wii bowling. You request the console and the game. Maybe you also search the spreadsheet for other bowling games. You could pick some other ones. You tell us how many people are coming, so we know how many controllers to get out. And you tell us how many hours you want to come to the reading room. And then, like you saw in the photo, we'll have a television set up when you come in with your console, and you'll be able to play the game. We've. It's funny that you mentioned Wii bowling because In one of our first class visits, we had about 15 students, and there were stations set up all around the room to play different games across all different consoles. And like the whole last half hour of class was just the entire class playing Wii bowling together. It's really beloved. So it's funny you picked that example.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Thank you. It was very fun for me to get to talk about it.